Let me call to order this Mayor Commission work session. Today is Monday, June 3rd, and the time is 10:01. So we'll dive right into the agenda. We're getting a report on Operations Clean Streets. Those of you who may recall, this is a program we put together in my first year in office, where we were simply going out to try to get the streets cleaner, removing and having taking a proactive approach to illegal dumping, removing abandoned vehicles off the streets. And I think we have some good news, hopefully. Mr. Pender, you give us an update?
Yes. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Leon Pender, Public Works Director for Public Works and Support Services. Just to give you all an update on Clean Streets Task Force. We're going to have an overview of Clean Street Task Force, some of the goals and objectives that we've been able to accomplish, and more importantly, some of the achievements that we've been able to accomplish since this was implemented. So what you're looking at now is a Clean Street dashboard, which is developed by Smartsheet. Mr. Hijazi has helped us put this together, so we'll go in more details. Each subcommittee have one of these dashboards as well. That's how we keep track with what's going on. The task force was created July 2021. You'll see on some of the members that's a part of the task force, because Public Works can't do it all by ourselves, so we need members and internal and external members that's a part of the task force. Some of the objectives: to implement target measured aim at reducing illegal dumping, litter, abandoned vehicles, and subcommittees implemented for reaching target objectives as well. Number one, illegal dumping subcommittee, goals and objectives. Implementing strategies to raise awareness about negative impacts of illegal dumping on environment, public health, and community aesthetics. Promoting responsible waste disposal practice through public outreach and educational events. Implementing public health and safety. And achieving cost savings by the city not cleaning up and disposing of illegal dumping. The dashboard for 2024 for illegal dumping, so far 2 arrests, 27 citations, 6 lots were CRA, 2 were city lots, and $200 reward has been given for 2024. Some of the achievements since inception: waste collected over 200,000 pounds, rewards given $1,300, citations 349, and a total of 14 arrests. Second, litter subcommittee, some of the goals and objectives for that committee: decreasing litter in public spaces, parks, streets, and waterways, educating residents and visitors on importance of proper waste disposal and negative impacts of littering, coordinating regular litter cleanups by mobilizing volunteers and community groups. With the litter subcommittee, on the next slide, you'll see some more information of some of the achievements that we've been able to do, but this, again, like I said, is how we keep track of all the committees and what's going on. Achievements so far: number of events, 64. Litter collected, over 26,000 pounds. Number of volunteers, over 1,600. Number of volunteer hours, over 4,000. Miles cleaned and improved, 30. Acres of parks cleaned and improved, 293. Abandoned subcommittee, number 3, the goals and objectives of this committee is identify and locating abandoned vehicles within the city, establishing procedures for reporting and documenting abandoned vehicles, to coordinate properly remove of abandoned vehicles, updating databases and tracking systems to monitor abandoned vehicles status. So far, 2024, we've tagged 145 vehicles, 22 have been towed, and 85% of them have complied. Total number of vehicles towed since inception, 811. Tagged, almost 100 towed, and 88% compliance.
What do you mean by compliance rate?
So what happens is if we go out and we red tag the vehicles, the individuals may move them, they may put tags on them, they may fix the tires or whatever by the time we go back, and so therefore that's in compliance.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yes, a follow-up from President Ward.
How much time between red tagging and follow-up do you guys usually have?
I think that's like 24 hours, we red tag it, and then 24 hours we go back and see if the vehicle's there. But again, that depends on our partners, which is the police department, and how busy they are, if they're able to go back, and sometimes the CSAs with the police department as well.
Okay, thank you.
Oops, sorry.
Yes, Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. How are we proactively going out and looking for these abandoned vehicles, or are they mainly reported in?
So a little bit of both. Sometimes people report them being abandoned, and then we would go out and take action on them. And then sometimes when we do like walks and things like that, where we work with other departments, then we go out and we find them that way as well.
Thank you.
Some of our future goals and objectives is to reduce environmental contaminant hazards caused by illegal dumping and littering, increase community engagement to foster a sense of responsibility for maintaining a clean and safe environment, developing policies and ordinance as needed to deter illegal dumping and littering, streamline process for addressing abandoned vehicles, and lastly, further improve task force database tracking systems and metrics. Any other questions?
Have we noticed any patterns? In other words, have we seen a trend and maybe a reduction in the amount of illegal dumping over time? Are we making progress at least?
Yes. So what I would tell you is that many times as we find that we go out into the communities, we've heard from different neighbors that there has been a significant amount of reduction in terms of people illegally dumping because of the cameras, because they hear about the arrests, because they know that we're on the move and we're taking illegal dumping very seriously here in the city of West Palm Beach.
Good. And commissioners, I'm sure you know, but it was unfortunate that before we started this proactive effort, there were certain neighborhoods in our city that were just seemed to be convenient for contractors from other communities to just bring their stuff and dump them and not have to pay for the disposal fees. And so obviously that is a black eye on the community. You know, it decreases their pride in their community. And frankly, I took it as an insult that someone would think that West Palm Beach neighborhoods were eligible for that kind of treatment. So I'm glad we are making progress, and hopefully it restores pride and dignity of the residents of those communities, letting them know that the city, they do count, and that the city does care about their neighborhoods as well. Commissioner Warren.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to share a comment and really an accolade to this operation as being someone that saw this happening firsthand, and where my office is located is between some apartment buildings that were cleaned out, and they took the opportunity of a vacant lot and dumped everything from roofing materials to paint buckets, and it was horrible, and it was a true snowball effect. And the city was contacted, everyone was engaged, acted very quickly, and it was a chain effect on our side with code enforcement, with administration, with Leon, and getting cameras installed, getting citations issued. Unfortunately, the citations went to who I think didn't cause the problem, but they contributed to the positive result. They got everything cleaned up, and put measures in place to help safeguard the property so that it wouldn't continue to happen. So I can tell you that this has worked, and I appreciate it. It made a huge difference because it was really, really, really bad, and it has been cleaned up and has not been a problem since then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you so much. First of all, I think that this is amazing. I'm so grateful that the city took this initiative. And Mayor, I wasn't sure, those statistics and that data that we're showing is staggering, and it tells a great story. I don't know if it's dynamic, if we're able to share that on the website in real time, or if it even just a snapshot or something, because I feel like.
Yeah, we will have communications work with the task force to get a much broader story out. Unfortunately, good news doesn't really drive people to clicks, but we can control our own narrative. So we will certainly do a major public relations announcement on this, because you're right, data doesn't lie. And for us to have made this amount of progress in a few years speaks volumes.
Definitely, thank you. And then one other question. I know that along the railroad tracks, that tends to be an area where people dump. I don't know if you and these teams traverse all of the railroad tracks, and obviously I know that that's managed by the Railroad Authority, but I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about our partnership and ensuring that stays clean as well.
So right now, we have worked with the railroad track company to, once we see some dumping there, we immediately notify them and try and get them to clean it up as quickly as possible. But we can't go within the property lines of the railroad because it's unsafe for us to do that.
Armando Fon, Assistant City Administrator. I happened to be on a call with Tri-Rail last week, so they are actively doing the same kind of operation on their end. They picked up, I forgot what the number was, but it was a huge number in terms of tonnage of debris and garbage on the SFRTA track over the last 6 months. So they've got an active program themselves.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Peduzzi, then Commissioner.
Thank you so much for all of these efforts. Littering is one of my huge pet peeves. It has been since I was a little kid, and I think this is great. One of the areas that particularly concerns me is those areas that are in close proximity to grassy waters, our water supply. I know that our police department has done a tremendous effort of stopping some illegal dumping of hazardous materials within the last couple of years, and that's particularly concerning. I think there was one incident somewhere in close proximity to Ibis that there was illegal dumping, and it was significant from my understanding. Do we have something set up in place to make sure, particularly in those areas that are adjacent to grassy waters, to protect our water supply?
No, not that I'm aware of it right now. I could definitely work with the police department and see if we could work something together and see if they tell us the areas, and at that time we can definitely look at what we may be able to accomplish. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Good morning. Victor Carosi, Director of Public Utilities. Just wanted to augment the question with regards to the protection of our water supply. Just be aware that one of the arms with the utilities is our watershed maintenance and team. We have routinely patrolling the various canals, such as our Canal, grassy waters, and throughout the community for debris, for hazardous substances. It's a routine inspection that we're doing. Also coupled with our stormwater, and there are also routine inspections of all our various canals where they might pick up illicit discharges, debris dumping, and it's an active program that we have as well as Leon for removing regular litter that comes into our canals, as well as looking for much, more of the other substances, things that might make their way. And it's a very active program we have to protect the water supply, to make sure our canals are safe, and that's just a routine that we do as well. So it's part of our operations as well. But thank you, and it's I can give you more updates if you'd like.
Yes.
Philip, my understanding was a couple of years ago that our police officers, their watershed officers that are signed out there, are also actively patrolling along the M5 and the L8 all the way out to the L8, which is west of Seminole Pratt Whitney. Do they still go out there and check for dumping and vehicles that might go into that canal?
Well, I can't speak obviously for the police department and what they do, but I could tell you from our perspective that, you know, our inspections do go all the way out to the LA tieback, so we're very active there, especially as we're looking for water quality issues. And if there is some type of a car accident, our team is notified and we immediately get some type of active control for any types of discharge that might come from a vehicle that might have found their way in. But as far as the patrols, the police department, I can't answer there. Thank you.
Raymond Shaw with the Police Department. Yes, we currently have officers that are only assigned to the catchment area. They have specially designed vehicles that allow them to patrol those areas, off-road, airboats, four-wheelers, side-by-sides, big jacked-up pickup trucks. The dive team also constantly patrols the canals to remove any of those vehicles and things that they have found in those areas.
Thank you.
Commissioner Warren?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to revisit my previous statement briefly and say that I particularly want to thank our code enforcement officer that came out initially and came back out and took photos. And then my staff called me and they were like, there's this lady taking photos out in the multiple occasions. It really showed a sense of ownership. And that code enforcement officer was Valerie Lester. And it really means a lot to our city to have people that are so vested in ensuring that we have the right environment. So I really wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the superior work that was done. Thank you. Thank you.
Quick question about the arrests. Do we know if their cases were prosecuted? Do we have any idea what the penalties were for those who were arrested?
No, sir. Mayor, I don't know exactly what the penalty was, but we can definitely get that information.
Can you follow up and
Yes.
hopefully they were prosecuted and either fined, significant fines or arrests? President Ward and Commissioner Fox.
As to the education piece, like I know you guys have been doing a lot of outreach, and I just want to know on the goals of what that looks like. I still find in our parks, it's not just, seeing cigarettes anymore, things like that. I see families just leave their trash behind too. So are we doing, workshops with schools, or what else could we potentially be doing? Because I'm always trying to think about how to get at some of these people to understand, don't leave your juice boxes behind in the playground.
So with our Keep West Palm Beach Beautiful coordinator, Dwayne White, he's reaching out to a lot of different organizations and schools, and we thought about reaching out at least with the elementary and middle schools, because if they're aware of it, then I think that it would then, snowball with the parents to have them take responsibility for those things as well.
Commissioner Fox?
Thank you so much, and thank you for all that you're doing. Every time you come to any of our meetings and the CRA and other areas, people are so excited to see you and to hear from you, and just very thankful for all the work that you're doing, especially in the historic Northwest. My question was about, in your future goals, mentioning the developing policies and ordinances about littering and illegal dumping. Are there other cities that you have other policies that you're looking for us to follow, or is there any suggestions, or is this just something that is a future goal that we haven't really given a lot of thought to? Because obviously it seems like there might be some simple things that we could put into place in terms of, especially littering. I think sometimes we go out and we're cleaning these neighborhoods, and an hour later I go back and I'm like, okay, there's garbage everywhere, and we just had 40 people cleaning up the park, so I would really love to talk about that, because that's something that obviously this board could work on sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Yes, so with Dwayne White, Keep West Palm Beach Beautiful, because we're affiliate of Keep America Beautiful, we look at best practices and work with other municipalities within the state and without the state to try and see what they're doing, to see if there's some things that we can perhaps implement.
Ms. Johnson, Mr. White's been on what, about 2 years?
Yeah, about 2 years.
All right, maybe it's time for him to probably come to a workshop and discuss what his experience has been and what efforts, outreach efforts he is doing. Give us a report on his work to date. Let's see if we can get that scheduled soon. Anything else for Mr. Pender on Operation Clean Street? Well, let me say publicly to you, Mr. Pender, and to all the members of the task force, thank you so much for all that you've been doing. It's great to see a plan come together.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I just want to add something real quick, I think it's important to know that, well, we've had other communities come to our meetings too. So we're setting the trend on this issue in South Florida. I mean, we've had Riviera Beach and some other cities that, Riviera Beach has been a regular attendee at the task force meetings, and it includes a lot of different departments. So it's a big effort.
That's great.
And it does not surprise me that West Palm Beach is leading. I'm biased, I know that, but anyway. Okay, thank you again, Mr. Prender. Item 2, vehicle replacement plan update. Mr. Rodriguez?
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Jose Luis Rodriguez, Assistant City Administrator, and I'm pleased to be here today to provide an update on a second initiative where we're making some progress and that there's been much discussion over the past couple of years, and that is the vehicle replacement program that was instituted in fiscal year 2023. By way of background, there's a couple of factors that the Fleet Division of Public Works takes into consideration when determining when vehicles need to be replaced. Among them is the mileage of the vehicle, so any vehicles in excess of 80,000 miles, the age of the vehicle, the number of years in service of the vehicle. For heavy-duty vehicles, and sanitation and dump trunks are a perfect example, we look to replace them on a 5-year schedule. For regular vehicles like cars and SUVs, we look to replace them on an 8-year schedule. A second factor is, are there any specific vehicles that, for their age and mileage, are just incurring excessive maintenance costs? So we'll look at, for the heavy vehicles, for the commercial vehicles, are they incurring over $150,000 in repairs or maintenance in one year? For regular vehicles, $15,000 in maintenance costs. And then the third factor that we look at is an analysis of the needs of the department. And there may be a department, for example, that has a regular sedan, a regular vehicle assigned to their department, but now their operations have changed, or they've obtained additional initiatives that they're trying to achieve, and they may now need something different. They might need a commercial vehicle or an SUV or a truck. And the first step is never to just go out and order a new vehicle for that department. We're very mindful that we're stewards of taxpayer funds. So what we will do is we'll see, is there another department that can use that vehicle? And 9 times out of 10 there is. We'll transfer that vehicle to that department. We'll then look to see if there's a department that no longer needs, for example, a truck or an SUV, and we can transfer it to the department that needs it. But then independent of that, if those needs cannot be met that way through the interactive process across all the departments in the city, then that's another component that we take into consideration when we're determining what vehicles need to be put on the list for replacement. For some additional background, as you'll remember, back in the Mayor Commission work session of August 22nd, there was an extensive discussion on the results of an analysis, a study that the Fleet Division conducted. And one of the items that was discussed was the fact that prior to FY23, when this commission implemented a funding of a vehicle replacement program, the practice was to use one-time funding as available for vehicle replacements. That causes 2 issues. You don't have a dedicated line in the capital budget to be able to address needs on an ongoing basis, and it creates a glut of vehicles that need to be replaced because you don't fund it for a couple of years because there's not one-time funding available. Now all of a sudden you've got 100 vehicles you need to replace all at once, which is not a good practice, and you don't want to have a third or half of your fleet in 1 year, or your entire fleet in 1 year being replaced, because then all those vehicles 5 years down the road or 3 years down the road are now all breaking down at the same time. So you're not able to spread out the maintenance cost across a reasonable amount of time. So as mentioned, that's not a good practice. The proper practice is to have a dedicated line item in your capital budget where, as funds are available, you are always funding some level of vehicle replacement in the capital budget. And that analysis showed that because we weren't doing that regularly, we didn't have that dedicated line item, we had over 118 vehicles as of calendar year, fiscal year '22, that needed to be replaced. And this is just general fund vehicles. We're not talking about enterprise funds. We're not talking about police vehicles that need to be replaced on a certain schedule per the police collective bargaining agreement. And it was going to cost us about $40 million to replace all those. So one of the recommendations was that we were going to allocate $8 million a year in general fund over a 5-year period to tackle that $40 million, 118 vehicle backlog. And FY '23 was the first year that the mayor and the commission approved moving to that model of having a line item dedicated in the budget and funding it to the tune of $8 million. You'll see it was actually a little bit more than $8 million in FY '23 to try to get that program ongoing. And as part of this new initiative or new way of following best practices, the fleet division has a 5-year fleet maintenance replacement schedule, and that replacement schedule is part of the budget development process, is reviewed every year. Every year as part of the budget development process, fleet goes out, has conversations and researches with each individual department, gets their feedback, then does its own independent analysis, because everyone always wants new vehicles. So they will do their own independent analysis and say, okay, based on the information from the departments, our maintenance, what we're seeing in maintenance costs, these are the vehicles that need to be added or deleted from that vehicle replacement schedule. So ongoing, we have and we will have an yearly updated 5-year replacement schedule. So looking at FY '23, which was the first year that this initiative was fully funded, you can see that we funded a little bit over $8 million, and that's because ARPA the ARPA funds allowed us the opportunity to allocate $4.9 million towards vehicle replacements, and then 4.7 from the general fund, and by doing a little bit more than the $8 million in the plan, we were able to take a bigger initial bite out of that 118 vehicle backlog. And then you can see that in addition to the $8 million in FY '23, $9.6 million that we funded for the vehicle replacement program, there are two subcategories that also were funded. $1.5 million in general fund for the police collective bargaining agreement to ensure we're in compliance with that agreement. That agreement requires that patrol vehicles be replaced after 8 years or 140,000 miles, whichever comes first. That has we always fund that to make sure we're in compliance with a contract. And then in addition to that, enterprise funds use their own funds for their own vehicles. So we had $1.2 million from those different various enterprise funds for a total of $12.3 million that we had funded for vehicle replacements in FY '23. In FY '24, similarly, you can see that through ARPA, general fund, and fire assessment, because there were some specialized fire vehicles that were needed that qualified for funding under the fire assessment. We got to that $8 million, $7.9 million in funding, and then you can see the other two subcategories there of police and enterprise funds, so $11.9 million for vehicle fundings that year. So digging into the statistics a little bit more, combined between FY '23 and FY '24, we ordered 188 vehicles. 88 of them, so a little bit less than half, were delivered, and we are still awaiting 22 vehicles that were ordered in FY '23 to be delivered, and 78 in FY '24. And the main issue is when the supply chains were impacted during COVID. That's a new reality that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. They were disrupted to the point that now business is being done in a different way. You've got companies and manufacturers that are still suffering from either parts shortages or employee shortages. So for the foreseeable future, we don't expect these delays to be surpassed. I will tell you, it is the same challenges that our colleagues in other local governments are facing. It is the same challenge that private commercial fleets, so it's not a question of money, it's a question of there's only so many things in the shelf ready to be bought, and too many people wanting to buy it. So it's a supply and demand issue. I will I will say, though, and I was just speaking with the police department about it this morning and with Mr. Pinder, we have the vehicles that we need working properly to achieve all of the, and deliver all of the services that the city needs to deliver. So I don't want the backlog to cause the impression that we don't have the vehicles that we need to operate city services and provide the city services that our residents and businesses expire. And then digging in a little bit deeper, you can see how the vehicle orders were allocated based on the needs of each department. And you'll see there the footnote that in FY23, we had more vehicles delivered than ordered, and that was because of that backlog. We still had vehicles from prior fiscal years that were now just being delivered in FY23. And in FY24, we can see that we ordered so far this year 78 vehicles, and 7 of them have been received. And before I move into that, the backlog issue is also a double hit, because we are getting the delays in receiving the vehicles from the manufacturers. But then when you get the vehicles, a lot of them cannot be put in service because they're not just a regular pickup or SUV that's being used by, for example, code enforcement will use a general car or a general SUV. They are specialized public safety or utilities or sanitation vehicles. So now you have to take that vehicle, deliver it to another contractor that then outfits them with the police radios and the sirens and everything else, and they're having a backlog of supplies and issues as well. So that's why that backlog fluctuates in that 18 to 36 month range. So types of vehicles ordered, just so you have an idea in the public safety. You can see that those are the types of specialized vehicles, especially the 2 at the top, the fire truck and the EMS truck that we order that have long lead times for completion. And in the police department, those are generally the types of vehicles that we're ordering. The 2 most common, you can see the Ford Explorer and the Chevy Tahoe are the patrol vehicles. And those patrol vehicles are the ones that, per the contract, you have to replace after every X number of years or mileage. So the current outlook is that we have 100 vehicles still pending delivery, and we expect to receive them throughout this fiscal year and next fiscal year. The backlog is not expected to change in the foreseeable future, but Fleet is continuing to monitor the ordering conditions and to try to get those orders expedited as much as possible. I can tell you that the fleet manager is out on leave today, but he will sit in front of the computer and he will click refresh until that portal opens up at a certain date and time when all new orders for the new fiscal year can come in, and he tries to be one of the first municipalities out there to get our orders in, and he will call and where's my vehicle. So we're doing that. But the other thing that we're doing is that excuse me, when opportunities present themselves for direct vehicle purchases through local dealers, as long as it complies with our procurement code and that local dealer can honor the contract that we are under, which is the Florida Sheriff's contract, is one of the contracts that we use, that we piggyback on to get those those contracted rates. If a local dealer has a vehicle that meets our specifications and they honor that price and it's within our procurement code, then we will go directly to a local dealer. The issue with local dealers is, again, the backlog. We might tell them, I need 10 SUVs of this specification, and they might be able to give us the price, but they'll tell you between these 2 or 3 dealers, we only have 2 of those that meet that requirement. So it helps to alleviate the backlog, but it won't resolve the backlog. But it's an additional tool and an additional example of how Mr. Pinder and the rest of his team are trying to ensure that no stone is left unturned as we try to meet the city's needs. And then the rest of the outlook is that for fiscal year 25, as part of the draft balanced budget that will be presented to the mayor and commissioner for consideration, there will be a recommendation funding for what we should be funding it, what funding should be allocated towards the FY25 vehicle replacement, which will be the 3rd year out of the 5 years that, if you approve it, you will be funding this as a standardized capital line item in the budget. And with that, we are all available for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Commissioners, let me just tell you how reassuring it is to have this approach. When I was first came on as mayor, we did not have such an approach, and it got to be, we were always scrambling to find dollars to replace vehicles, and it got so dire that as we were entering into our negotiations with the public safety unions, these became matters of significant interest. And there's nothing worse than knowing you have this serious need out there and not having the funds to do it. I mean, it adversely affected our ability to provide the quality of public safety service to our residents that they deserve. So kudos to you, Ms. Johnson. I believe this was implemented after you came on as city administrator, bringing those best practices to us. And now we are in the position, as you can see there. What was the total backlog? Can you go back to that first slide, and what kind of progress are we
I
making there?
believe it was 118.
Yes. It was 118 at 40 million.
Okay. And we are up to where? What kind of progress are we making?
Yeah.
You got to go to all the way to the end. Anyway,
Yeah.
we are making significant progress. It is. We're in a much better position. Commissioner Warren.
Mayor, if I could just make a footnote to your comments, I want to recognize
Absolutely.
in the past, PBA and certainly now FOP for working with the city, in that historically we had not met that requirement in the CBA. And so given that it was not included in our capital budget or our budget planning, and we were scrambling to find money as we could, you know, they worked with us and with the understanding that we were trying to get there. So I do want to recognize, you know, their efforts to work with us on this matter.
Thank you. All right, so in looking at that, obviously some of those vehicles being delivered were prior to the calculation of the backlog.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. But this slide, Mr. Mayor, if I may, this slide illustrates the exact issue that you're bringing up, which is we had 118 vehicles in a backlog. You shouldn't have had that high of a backlog. And then when you addressed the issue of the backlog by having the 5-year funding at $8 million, you started eating away at that $1 million, but the request for new vehicles still comes in, so that 118 jumped to 188 that had to be ordered. So you'll see a peak, and then hopefully, now that we have this established new best practice by you and the commission and the city administrator, you'll start seeing that come down to a more manageable level, consistent level in the future.
Thank you. Commissioner Warren.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate that we addressed this need. I think that it was a very important matter. And I also appreciate that we have a forward-thinking approach to it as we continue to maintain the proper inventory level of vehicles. When I looked at slides 6 and 8, and I guess it's 188 vehicles. Now, are those replacements for vehicles that are currently in place, or are we looking at new and additional inventory of vehicles?
I'll defer to Mr. Pender. I believe the vast majority of them are replacements of vehicles. There might be one or two here and there where a department needs one more vehicle because they have now an expanded staff or more areas that they need to service, but it's replacement vehicles.
Thank you. And when we retire or replace vehicles from our inventory, the same demand that we have that we've been that's been very hard to fill with supplier is there's a huge demand for used vehicles in the marketplace. So when we look at those retired vehicles, how are they factored into the budget? What are we doing with them? What does that look like as we sunset?
Okay. We actually sell those vehicles, and that funding come back to help with the $8 million. Because we had kept vehicles beyond their use for life, we were getting pennies on the dollars. But now that we're on this track, I think we're getting maybe a tad bit more because they're in better condition when we sell them. But the fact is that we sell those vehicles and whatever we get for them goes back into the fund or the pot.
Follow up.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So when we look at slide 2, and it showed, thank you very much, Madam Administrator, because I think that's important. When we look at slide 2, it shows vehicles over 15,000 annually in repairs. I think that's a significant amount of money. And when we slide 2,
The
where's
previous
the
one?
answer here on slide 3?
2.
Slide.
There we go.
So the annual maintenance expense is 15,000 for cars or SUVs. Are we looking at the ledger of that? And if it's 15,000 last year and then 10,000 this year, and the car is worth 20,000, where do we draw the line and say, okay, it makes more sense for us to look at a replacement for this vehicle?
Yes, we do look at that, and if that is the case, that vehicle may be up for retirement a little bit sooner than later. Because we realize that, hey, if a vehicle only costs us $40,000 and we're spending $30,000 in 2 years, so we work with the departments and see if that's a good candidate that can go out and get another vehicle.
Thank you.
President Ward?
Thank you. And so when we talk about 40 million over 5 years, what's our forecast? How long are we looking at as far as what other vehicles potentially past that where we'd be hitting a different pot of funds, like our trash, or is it that 5 years and that's kind of when we'll look at it again and then forecast another 5 years out?
You know, from my perspective, I look at a 5-year vehicle plan sort of in the same vein that you look at your capital improvement plan. Theoretically, when you're looking at that 5-year capital improvement plan, each year, 1 year falls off and you add another year, so you always theoretically with a 5-year plan. And hopefully we'll be in that position with the 5-year vehicle replacement plan where a year comes off, a year gets added. But it's typically that 5-year outlook.
Okay, so follow up on that.
Yes.
So if we continue to do that, we're not going to see, oh my gosh, we have to figure out another 40 million on top of that. We'll always kind of have a steady, I realize these are expenses and that it's very expensive to maintain these vehicles or replace them, but we're never going to, if we continue this forward, we're never going to be like, oh my gosh, we got to figure out how to get way more than what we would budget.
Right, yes. If we continue with a plan, it will keep us from getting back in the situation that we found ourselves in, yes.
Any other questions or comments or observations? All right.
Thank you.
Another bit of good news. Thank you. Thanks to all involved. Okay. Are we ready for item 3, proposed ad valorem tax incentive reimbursement? We have all parties
Yes, we
here?
are, Mayor.
Okay.
I'm going to ask Miss, let me make certain I pronounce this right, Kitzmiller, is that correct pronunciation? To join me at the table, please.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, staff in the room, and those that are joining us on Channel 18. Faye Johnson, for the record, City Administrator, and I am excited about presenting this proposed program for the board's consideration. And before I get into it, I just want to add a couple of footnotes that we are always looking for opportunities of how we can add additional tools in the toolbox to help redevelop, areas within our city, and particularly areas that have perhaps, been overlooked and maybe have not had the appropriate level of investment that we have seen, let's say if we use the downtown as example, or areas within our CRA, because the CRA, given that we have the tax increment financing, that's a critical tool to help with the redevelopment. So as the mayor has challenged us, and as he has had conversations with different members of our community on different tools or initiatives that we can look at considering This one kind of rose to the top of items here recently. So we've been looking into it, and I'm bringing it forward now to have this discussion with the board, and hopefully we'll get a green light to then move it to the next step. So with that, let me just go back. It is a proposed ad valorem tax reimbursement program, and we kind of look at it as an economic development or redevelopment initiative. So for this discussion, we're going to do just a overview here for the board, then have Ms. Kitzmiller kind of walk through the legal authority. I will like to footnote that what we are proposing is modeled after a program that the city of Fort Lauderdale has on its books, and Ms. Kitzmiller was the author of some of the legal analysis that was done for Fort Lauderdale. So I'm going to then walk through the proposed guidelines and criteria, how they align with our strategic pillars, and then go through what we see as the next steps, and then certainly discussion and questions from the commissioners. And we can certainly do that as we go through the various points. So with that, what we're looking to do is to bring about enhancement of economic activity in the non-CRA areas, of the city. Again, within the CRA areas, and we know we have the downtown CRA and then the CRA within the historic Northwest that has the tax increment financing that I mentioned. So this particular proposed program is focused on non-CRA areas to give us a similar type of tool that the CRA has by way of tax increment financing. We're looking to attract and expand certain key targeted industries within the non-CRA areas. And because of the critical need that our city and across the nation is facing with affordable and workforce housing, we want to include that as an option as well. The projects, if they are to be approved, would use the tax increment that is generated from that particular development. So it will function in the same way as the TIF. So theoretically, if a development were to be approved, we know that what the tax base would be from that particular project. Based on those improvements, we would take that increment and then put it back into the development, or allow the developer to use it for financing a number of other particular measures. We certainly always want to make certain that whatever initiatives that we bring forward, that there is an alignment with our strategic plan, in particular our strategic pillars. So with that, I want to turn it over to Ms. Kitzmiller to have her walk through the legal authority, because that has to be the fundamental basis by which we can move forward, is that there is the legal basis. And so with that, I want to introduce Ms. Kitzmiller to the mayor and the commission, and have her come up. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Mayor and City Commission, for having me here today to discuss this program. I want to apologize at the outset that I have a little bit of a drowned rat appearance. Your South Florida downpour caught me unprepared this morning, but I promise that doesn't affect my legal analysis. At the outset, your city administrator did a fantastic job about talking about the basis of this. This is really about your tax increment. When you have a business come to town, it increases the value of the properties, and your taxes on those properties surrounding it tend to go up. What this allows you to do is shave off what I'm going to call the cream, the extra. It doesn't decrease your tax revenue at all. It takes that extra, and at the city's discretion, allocates all of it or a portion of it back to the businesses that are responsible for that increased revenue. I want to start out my analysis by saying this is not a program that's been tested at law. We have no case law on it. We do not make any guarantees regarding what a court would find on this. All we can say is that there is a strong legal basis for this. It may be that it's such a popular thing, no one's bothered to try it yet, or it might be that people aren't using it widely enough for it to have been challenged. But in any case, I just want to start my presentation off with the idea that while we are confident in our analysis, this has not been tested. First off, municipalities, as you all know, are granted broad rights to tax and spend in the Florida Constitution. In fact, they are allowed to spend money for any, quote, municipal purpose. They are limited only by Article 10, Section 7 of the Article 7, Section 10 of the Constitution, which states that money shall not be used directly for the benefit of any public or private entity. Now, what's important here is that you have to know that investing in economic development has not been considered an investment in a private entity, either in a corporation or an individual, where there is economic development gains. And we know that because that's been declared by the state legislature in statute. As you can see in front of you in subsection 166.021 sub 8, a municipality may expend funds to attract and retain business enterprises. This includes a variety of investment tools, including making grants to public enterprises for the expansion of businesses existing in the community or attraction of new businesses to the community. In your proposal, in your program proposal, your businesses have already invested and made that expansion, or if this is a new business, to attract. And we know this. We know that they've done that because we have the evidence in the tax increment. We can see that they have invested and that investment has culminated in additional revenue. So therefore, at the outset, you are meeting this requirement of the Florida Constitution, which is the attraction or expansion of businesses. I will caution you, this should be looked at strictly as a reimbursement, and there's a variety of reasons for that that are very technical, and I'm happy to get into if you have questions, and should not be looked at as an exemption or something upfront. They would rather be required to pay their full tax bill and then get a rebate or a reimbursement. And there's a variety of reasons for that I'm happy to go into, but it deals with constitutional law and a variety of other things. But if the commission has any questions, I'm happy to answer now, or Ms. Johnson, if you prefer, at the end of the presentation.
Mayor, if you don't mind, I think we would like to pause, and if there are legal questions.
Okay, any questions relating to the legal portion of the presentation? Okay, proceed.
Thank you very much. I'll be around at the end of the presentation if you have anything.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to proceed with the proposed program. So in terms of the guidelines, as are articulated from the onset, the projects must be located outside of a CRA designated area or CRA boundaries of the city of West Palm Beach. The eligible developments have to include at least one of the various targeted industries, and they are outlined in the slide before you. And again, as I mentioned, given the critical need for workforce and affordable housing, we're also allowing that as an option. And that also ties into what we are seeing happen now with the new laws, where we can do affordable housing developments when within a commercial development or industrial development. So it makes sense to allow affordable workforce housing as part of this initiative. And if it were to be included, it would have to meet our local ordinance that we have for affordable workforce housing. It kind of lays out, what those restrictions are, that the income has to be at or below 100% of the median family income, and a 30-year deed restriction. On the eligible targeted industries, those align with what we have in our current economic development plan. So we are really kind of merging part of what we already have in place and then codifying it as part of this newly proposed program. So in terms of the incentive and the level of it, what we are proposing is that it would not exceed 95% of the project's tax increment, and that ties into how we budget. We budget at 95% of what we collect here, and that's statutorily required. The tax increment refund, the amount would be determined annually. We're proposing a term of up to 25 years. Typically, when we see development projects come in, they look for a longer than a 10-year term. So we are proposing up to 25 years. That length of the term would be determined on a project-by-project basis. We did not want to propose just a set number, let's say, for example, 15 years, because some projects, the 15 years may be fine. Another project may need the 20 years, and then we may have a project, depending on the scale and magnitude, that would need the 25 years. So we want to design the program with a degree of flexibility and kind of look at the merit of each one individually. The level of the reimbursement percentage in terms of that 95% also would be determined by looking at certain factors, and this is similar to what we look at with economic development projects. We'll look at the level of the capital investment, the total number of jobs that will be created, what's the salary, price points, and there may be some other factors that we look at. So based on that, we may recommend to the board that we reimburse 50% of the tax increment. If it's at an extremely high level of those factors, we may recommend reimbursement of 90%, but the level of the reimbursement on the tax increment, we really want to have that set up where we negotiate that and have that primarily driven by the city, as opposed to every project that comes in, we determine that they would automatically be eligible to get the 95%, which would be the maximum of that tax increment.
Yeah.
So in term, I'm sorry.
The board has a question.
Yes.
Those guidelines, when you're talking about, sometimes you see the asking about 10 years versus, where are you looking at that for the basis of these guidelines? CRA district or requests and other, how did you build these?
Well, we kind of looked at CRA, and then just based on experience and then based on conversation, when you look at some of the areas that hopefully this would be an incentive to then bring in development. Some of the areas, when you think about non-CRA areas, have been subject to disinvestment for maybe years, maybe historically. And trying to incentivize development under this program, we may need more than the 10 or the 15 years. So we're proposing up to 25 years to give us that long runway if we were to need it. We're not proposing that we set the program guidelines where it would be 25, but up to, so that we have that discretion. And when we, if it were to move forward and we implement the program, experience may tell us that we don't get a request for the 25 years, but we may. And I think as we get the program off the ground and get experience, and then we'll know whether or not, that 25-year runway is something that we need to have on the books or not. But the fact that it's up to, it gives us that ability where if it's only 10 years that they need, that's what we would recommend as part of the approval to the board.
And a lot of that data is going to come from the actual discussions and negotiations with the project developer. They're going to have to make the business case for why they need this money. So we will be going through those numbers very carefully. We're just not going to arbitrarily pick a number. It's something that's going to be negotiated based upon our analysis of the data that the project developer brings to us. Clearly, they're all going to try to get as much time as possible in order to have a rebate of those taxes, but we're going to, there will be robust negotiations, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
Yes, and I think, don't lose your thought, I think there are the two key thresholds that we probably are going to focus on the negotiation is just the amount of the reimbursement. I think we can probably expect that they're going to want to get as much of that increment back as possible. Then certainly the length of the term, to have it as long as possible. But, the mayor said it very elegantly. I look at it in terms of, on the merit. That's the business case. But go right ahead.
I'm very sorry. I just want to chime in. One of the things that you think about when you're looking at these businesses is they are going to be making most of their investment up front in the early years, but the tax increment is going to catch up more slowly. So that's why a lot of businesses look at a 10-year return on investment or a longer return on investment, and they're going to want to know that they're going to continue getting that increment for a longer term, because that's when the actual money is to be recuperated. It tends to be you lose money up front and then you have to count on being able to bring in that money on the back end. That's why a lot of places ask for a minimum of a 10-year guarantee.
Oh, thank you for bringing that point to the discussion. Any other?
Commissioner Warren?
Thank you. The last bullet on page 6 here, on slide 6, where it identifies reimbursement percentage, capital investment, total job creation, salaries, et cetera. When we move forward with this, I would love to see that there's language that's included where we're talking about local jobs that are created, because we are talking about taxpayer-based incentives that are going to developers. And if jobs are being created, but they're not being created for people in West Palm Beach, I think that that's not giving us the full benefit. So I think that we should be very clear about that. I don't know what the language would be, and I'm sure that, I'm hopeful that it can be a part of the robust negotiation that we have.
Well, this is just an outline. The actual policy in its final form will come back to the commission for formal adoption. Your point is well taken, and so we'll make sure that as we begin drafting the actual I guess this is ordinance or resolution?
It's a resolution.
The resolution, you all will have a chance to see what that language looks like, but point well taken.
Thank you.
Commissioner Peduzzi.
So as we proceed with considering this, my concern would be that the more development that we have, the more required services there are, and the impact this will have on the general fund and the ability to continue enhancing public services and to make sure that we have those funds available in the future to upgrade what we need to upgrade or add additional personnel as the city grows. And so what will be the anticipated impact on the general fund, and will we still have the ability to continue adding public safety personnel and public works personnel and people that will be required with this continued growth?
I can't answer the question in the definitive in terms of number of new personnel that we would need, let's say, for police or fire or public works or what have you. I mean, we always take that into consideration. Structuring the program as it is proposed gives us that ability where we factor that into the forecast by making it up to. So theoretically, if a project is generating a certain level of increment, knowing that there's going to be an impact for additional firefighters, additional police, then it stands to reason that we are not going to just automatically give them the total amount of that increment, because you got to allow for how you're going to have them participate in the cost of the increase public service or public works or whatever the case may be. So we will do that kind of project by project analysis and then make the appropriate recommendation to the board on what the level of the increment that we would recommend for reimbursement. And then, of course, that differential will go into the general fund, but that's an excellent point.
Thank you.
And again, keep in mind, this is what we're trying to do is just get, as Administrator Johnson started out with, another tool in our toolbox to help us as we try to attract businesses. And obviously, for each deal, it's going to look different. But the intent here is to give us that additional tool, similar to what we have in CRA areas, parts of our city, and non-CRA neighborhoods and districts. Again, just an additional tool to help us with the economic development. Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to see this come forward for our consideration. I think that our CRA areas have benefited from this type of program, and I think that some of our non-CRA districts could benefit as well. And so thank you for taking the time to do this. I was curious, Ms. Johnson, when you're talking about the analysis of infrastructure, case by case, project by project, the analysis that you're describing, I feel like that's already in place, right? Or are you describing something that would go above and beyond what we already look at when approving projects, when looking at the capacity that the city has for a new project?
It would go above and beyond as it relates to this particular program, in that this analysis would be factored into how much of the reimbursement from the increment that we would recommend, and then the length of the term. As a matter of procedure, we're always analyzing the impact of new development coming into the city and how it's going to impact staffing needs, whether it's fire, police, public works. You know, we have additional needs that come with street maintenance and the host of different services. But this one, it would be focused on those two particular thresholds and would guide the recommendation. And we don't do that specific type of analysis on other projects that come through the door, because it's a different criteria that we look at.
Very good. Thank you.
And again, it's the interim or the incremental tax benefits that we're looking at rebating as opposed to the full amount of tax. So there's that delta between, we take a baseline look at what was being generated by that property prior, and then with working with the project developer, we'll look at what the estimates of additional revenues might be. But it's also important to note, Ms. Johnson, it's probably in a later slide, that we don't make the absolute guarantee, all right, because we can't do that. We have to look at each year, we'll have to do an analysis on the delta and a calculation of what will be available. We can't give a flat guarantee that they'll get X dollars per year for the next 25 years, because we have to keep in mind the realities of and we have to do an assessment of the fiscal situation each year going forward. Commissioner, did you have your hand up, Commissioner Fox?
No.
Okay, Commissioner Baduzzi.
And thank you for addressing that. My concern is 25 years out is a long time, and I just don't want to see us in a situation where we have, many of our businesses, who own property in the city not contributing to the general fund, yet being a drain on services. I mean, I can understand it might be easier for us to look at that in the short term, in the next couple of years, of what we could offer them. But when you go that far out, we don't know what the economic situation is going to be, and I would just hate to have put that on a future generation that we've got, properties that aren't generating any revenue for the city.
Again, I think we have some safeguards against that scenario occurring. we will always have a property generating some tax revenue from the city because what they are paying in taxes, they will continue. So if we just narrow it down to the increment, and given the fact that we're not proposing that automatically they get all of their tax increment and they get it for the entire 25 years, we would structure it whereby a portion, and whatever that portion is, that's to be determined, would be split between some of it going back to the developer, and then a portion of it going to the general fund for whatever that period of time. Now, does that mean that there won't potentially be an exception where a project may be recommended for the full 25 years and the full 95% potentially? But the business case for that kind of recommendation is going to have to be so very significant to get past a city administrator who looks at the dollars to stand before the mayor and the commission and make that recommendation. But my point is that we will be as judicious with this program and what we propose to the board as we are with putting together the annual budget. We certainly have to keep our eyes on the long-term impact because you make a good point. There's no crystal ball for us to look down the road 25 years and to know what our financial situation is going to be. But we can, to the extent financially possible, make certain that on that project-by-project basis, we do that critical analysis and have a comfort level that we're making a very strategic, judicious recommendation to the board on how that increment should be split and then the length of terms.
Commissioner Fox?
Thank you so much. I really like the idea that we're looking at outside of the CRA area. We have these developments that are sort of old strip malls down Okeechobee and things like that where there hasn't really been a lot of revitalization for years. I know that the TPA, one of the things that they were looking at in terms of thinking a light rail maybe years from now that would go downtown all the way to Wellington, just specifically to try to make sure that that corridor had more economic growth and development and housing and things like that. But I guess my question in terms of how this would work with, you mentioned with the Live Local Act or whatever the Senate bill is that we're calling it now, it basically would be a double incentive, it sounds like, that if somebody wanted to come in and, let's say, build 20 stories in an area that is commercial or not zoned for that at the moment, as long as they had affordable housing component. But then on top of that, would this incentive also be a second incentive for them, or it would be one or the other? I'm just wanted to be sure I was understanding.
So on the Live Local, and we don't have the legal expert on the Live Local, and Armando, you may be able to help me here. That incentive is going to focus on allowing affordable housing to be built in areas where traditionally they were not allowed. If they were in a commercially zoned property, you couldn't put residential in there. If it were in an industrial, you couldn't put affordable housing or residential in there. So they would be able to do it. Given that that is now in place, let's say you have a shopping center that now, under this new law, has the ability to bring affordable housing in there. This would be a tool to incentivize them to now redo this shopping center and take advantage of this particular program in terms of the tax increment that they would be getting. And now, did I miss something in terms of Live Local?
Just briefly, because we also have our own local incentives that we're putting in place that'll become before you soon. But on a program like this, one way we could, let's say they do qualify for either our incentive, Live Local, and could apply for this, one way to potentially utilize it would be then to get additional units or different levels of area median income qualification. So we have to go, I would think, would go beyond the other incentives in order to be able to qualify for something like this.
Okay, thank you.
And I think most of the times with the Live Local and even our own ordinance, it's not a tax rebate.
That is correct,
We
Mayor.
give them additional units, and a portion of those units are to be for affordable housing. Now, we may have a project here which, when they come to us, they may not be taking advantage of some of the other legislation available, but may include a workforce housing component. And they would get, and if that is a project that we like, and they are applying under this particular guideline, yeah, they would get some tax rebate or abatement because it included that. But again, that's going to be done on a case-by-case basis. But there won't be any double dipping.
No, theoretically, this is how I envision it. So if we go back to, oh, that's the slide there, where we indicate that it may include the affordable workforce housing, but they would have to meet all of our local ordinances and whatnot. So if they are going to apply for this program and it's going to have that housing component, they have to be in compliance with whatever program we have on the books. So in fact, this would then give them an additional incentive by way of them being eligible to get a portion of that increment from the increased value put back into the project. So in essence, it would be a financing tool that probably would help them be able to then redevelop that entire, if we're talking about a strip shopping center, wherein before they may not have had the ability from a financing standpoint to do a complete redevelopment of a shopping center, if that turns out to be the case.
Administrator, may I comment on the way it was done in Fort Lauderdale?
Oh,
that affected
absolutely. You
affordable
have
housing?
experience under your belt.
Yeah, the project that we did in Fort Lauderdale that involved an economic, in their case, it wasn't so much a economic development incentive, but it was a tax increment rebate. And the way that worked is they wanted to build a large housing complex in Fort Lauderdale that was going to have a significant affordable housing component to it, that was going to offer units at even a lower income rate than was required to take advantage of a variety of state laws and local regulations. So it was not just workforce housing, but low income or very low income. And because it had that component, offering a tax increment fulfilled the obligation that it be for a public purpose. And then so the city offered a tax increment rebate for, I think it was 15 years. And we then, the developer pledged that rebate as collateral on their loan to fund the build and the project. And so even though they couldn't guarantee the amount of the tax increment, and that's very important, as the mayor pointed out, that you never guarantee the amount of the tax increment, but they said any money that we get from our tax increment deal with the city will be used to pay our loan. And so they were able to get that additional collateral based on this. So that's kind of how this would work in that affordable housing context that you're looking at. It's less of a regulatory relief, which is what a lot of affordable housing are, not having to meet various zoning codes, getting waivers on densities, et cetera, but rather it's a cash incentive that allows the project to move forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments before we move on? Okay, you can continue, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, so last of all, in terms of our strategic plan and the 8 strategic pillars, we see this proposed program aligning with pillars 2, 4, 5, and 7. 2 being the built environment, 4 being education, economy, and jobs, 5 equity and empowerment, and 7 public health and public safety. So moving right on to the next steps, should the board give the green light to us moving forward with it, we would finalize the program guidelines and an application. with the intent of having that work completed by the end of this month, and then bring the guidelines to the board for adoption via resolution in one of your July board meetings, and then look to launch the program through some type of marketing and promotion so that we're ready to implement by the beginning of August. And with that, Mayor, that concludes my presentation, and Ms. Kitzmiller and myself are available for further questions from the board.
Thank you. Question on President Ward.
Thank you. So I know we're talking about outside of CRA boundaries, but where are we going to limit this? Where are we looking? Where's our map to show where we're going to be doing this?
Our proposal is to not limit it, to have it citywide in non-CRA areas, so that if there is a development opportunity in any corner of our city that falls within the guidelines, they would be eligible for consideration. So we're not looking to carve out specific areas that are outside of the CRA, but to make it citywide in non-CRA areas.
Follow up. This is just more of a comment. That almost concerns me more. I feel like there's natural competition in specific areas and not competition. I mean, CRAs were created for a specific reason. So when you look at, I understand, Coleman Park, I think that's a great opportunity for this because they're outside of a CRA area. Industrial areas, Commissioner Fox said, along Okeechobee, but there's some areas that are already thriving, and I feel like this would just push competition in those areas to a different degree. Then you're having staff look at areas that maybe don't need it, but they still have to go through that process because we have to treat everybody fairly, and then just to say, hey, you know what, that's not going to work. And honestly, obviously with the competition in the existing CRA areas, we haven't finished our work in those areas. So then are we just now defeating the purpose of those CRAs? So I'm just a little bit concerned in that regard because I'm just hearing this now. I maybe have to digest it a little bit, but.
Well, I think one thing to consider, the projects usually come to us from the private sector. It's not like the staff is going out trying to identify the projects, and we're not doing RFPs and stuff on this stuff. So a lot of what I anticipate, I don't know how it worked in Fort Lauderdale, is that developers will look at land or opportunities, put together a project, and then come to us, the city, and say, we recognize you have this program. Now we would like to apply for this incentive, and this is what we're planning to do. This is where we're planning to do it. And to your point about location, if it's in a part of our city that we don't think it will work for whatever reason, then we would probably say, all right, I don't think that's something that it fits in with the future vision of the city. So it's not as if staff is going out trying to create these deals. We're just having this program available, letting developers factor that into when they're putting together projects, and then they will come and apply to us for this incentive. But it's still up to the city to determine whether it's consistent with what we feel is best for the city as a whole.
I'd just like to respond because I might have
Yes.
misspoke or it was confusion. I meant the staff time not to go out and look at for potential projects, for reviewing, the time it takes to review those projects. That's not what I just want to be clear.
Commissioner Warren.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to see this because I know that when we began having these conversations a few years ago, this was actually something that I brought forward and thought was extremely important because I do have those commercial corridors down Okeechobee Boulevard, Palm Beach Lakes Boulevard, Military, on the east side of Military Trail, et cetera, that I felt there was tremendous opportunity for Class B offices because not everyone is going to be able to afford to have an office downtown in West Palm Beach. Not everyone is going to be able to thrive and survive there. So in order for us to be a facility or a city that accommodates everyone, then we need to be able to look at all of our commercial corridors and where we can have businesses that can succeed and where people can go, because not everyone wants to come downtown. People want to go different parts of our city, and they should be able to and have a similar quality of life as they would have in our downtown area. I think that this brings up an important opportunity, because this was originally brought up several years ago when I first became a commissioner, and we addressed our projects, our priority projects. I would love for us to revisit that and see where we're falling as it relates to the things that were identified. I think that we've made some progress. I'd like to be able to take a look back and see how far we've come as it relates to some of those issues, revisit those priorities, and see if there's anything that we can adjust or modify or move up or down on that list. Because when we look now, this is post-COVID. This is looking at the workforce housing, the workforce and affordable housing issue that wasn't quite as large back then. This is looking at the AMI that is completely different than it was then. So I think that this conversation does warrant an opportunity to go back and revisit where we are.
Let me, if I could, Mayor,
Yes.
just respond. I can tell you, Commissioner Warren, without having it in front of me, that on the priority projects that the board identified as part of the last strategic planning process, that we are well on the way to having those projects completed. And based on what I know those projects to be, I would venture to say that this particular program would not impact those. Where this particular program comes into play and would be impactful would be on the very discussion that you brought forward about the Okeechobee Quarter. And that discussion and the dance, and I know you were not very pleased with me having to say that to you and sounding like a broken record, is outside of the CRA. I don't have a tool or an ability to do any incentives for commercial developments along Okeechobee Boulevard, because the general fund was completely out of the question. And I think you even had some questions about a short strip between Okeechobee and Village. It was a couple of those businesses that were sort of on the edge and needed just a boost or some type of small incentive, but we didn't have a tool that we could offer them. And so I know that's been a source of frustration. This particular program would be available for us to consider them, but as it relates to the strategic projects, we are well on the way. And I think when we do the next update to the board, and I'm looking at my staff because I'm going to hold them to making certain that I'm accurate, we're going to be at about 90 to 95% with a completion rate on those strategic projects, because we've been working very hard on those.
Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Warren that that there certainly needs to be some incentives in certain areas of our city, but I have the same concerns that Commissioner Ward has when it comes to the areas that we should be incentivizing. I think there are some areas that may not need as much incentive as other areas, and if you make it citywide, maybe if we just are careful not to just lump them all together when they come in, but make sure that, hey, is this area that they are proposing this project, does it need to be incentivized? I mean, if it's in the most beautiful part of the city that everyone wants to be, maybe they don't need as much of an incentive as for some other areas that aren't so that aren't drawing people right now too. And that's just my concern, is that if we're going to do this as an incentive, let's make sure we identify the areas that really need the incentive and make sure that the incentive amount is bigger in those areas.
Well, I think, certainly I'm hearing the comments, and we can look to see what kind of criteria along that line that will address that we can develop. I would have to work with legal and with staff to see how we can add, a criteria that would get at that. But as we stand right now,
Well, I think you have to be careful with that, because once you start identifying those areas that weren't necessarily identified, they're going to say, why not us? They might not necessarily agree that they are sufficiently incentivized, for lack of a better word, and may feel that they are being short-sighted by not including them. I think you keep it as a citywide program and review everything on a case-by-case, development project by development project basis, rather than trying to necessarily pick and choose which neighborhoods, which portions of the city should be eligible for this and which ones aren't. I think that takes us down a slippery slope. Commissioner Lambert.
Okay, I got a lot of advisors. Point well taken. Go right ahead, board. We'll sit.
Thank you. I understand what President Ward is getting at, and I also am concerned about staff resources and making sure that, we don't spread our staff too thin. Can you talk a little bit about the process? As I would imagine, but I don't want to assume, that if a developer comes to staff, that there's initial discussions even before data and research and time and effort is put into analysis. And so is there discussion about our toolbox and which tools might be more readily available and more appealing for that developer? Or what is that process like? Because we're not typically involved in that level until it comes to the commission for approval.
That's pretty much what we do now. If a developer is interested in doing a development with the city, one of the things that they do on the front end is to meet with staff, and it varies. Sometimes they meet only with the department directors and their staff, to get an understanding of what incentives may be available, what are the regulations, if we're talking about zoning or density or whatever the case may be. And if it's something that they determine out of that discussion, is really feasible, then they usually will ask to meet with either one of the assistant administrators or myself, and or have the mayor included in that discussion to further vet, the feasibility of whether or not this is something from a policy standpoint, would be supported, and something from the community standpoint as well. So certainly, I envision that they would go through that same process of meeting with us, just kind of sharing with us what they have in mind. And that's something that we do sort of just par for the course. There are a number of developments that have not materialized from those discussions, and certainly there are a number that have materialized. I don't see where we will get out of being able to do that, because that's just part of the back-end work that you do with bringing literally almost everything forward to the board.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fox?
Thank you. Would there be any kind of cap on, I guess, how many of these incentives could be in one area? Like, I'm thinking, for example, if a city place type development comes down Okeechobee, then that is probably going to spur the whole area, where we don't need any more incentives to another business to go across the street, because the whole neighborhood might be changed by the development that's there. I'm just thinking, in terms of our tax base, the more of these incentives we give, the less taxes that are coming to us in places that, once we give some of them in one area, we might not need to do it anymore. So I guess I'm just curious if that's something that's been considered about a cap on the neighborhoods, or, is there going to be an expiration date for when this program sunsets, the way we have a CRA that sunsets because we've done all the incentives that we need to?
As it is proposed right now, it does not include a recommended cap. I think part of what we wanted to do here was to have this discussion, to bring it to the board to present so that we can get feedback. Having a cap on the number of developments on the front end, gives me some consternation in that each type of development will differ, so it's hard to say you're going to put a cap, on the number. I think the way that we would try to handle that is by having the program be flexible, and we do that critical analysis on the front end with what we recommend. Now, the backstop with any neighborhood or what we bring forward would be the policy action of the board. You know, if we were to bring something forward and from a policy standpoint based on what the board knows about our city and what has been brought forward and the recommendation of the staff, you know, if it's something that does not meet the expectations of the board, then I think that drives the policy decision in one direction. You know, if it's something that the board, based on those factors and any other factor that you take into consideration, feels that it meets within their expectations, then it would drive the policy decision in another direction. So starting out, I think we really have to kind of get experience under our belt and stay flexible and tweak the program as we, you know, go along. But I wouldn't want to start out by putting a cap, you know, in a particular neighborhood, and those kind of hard measures, because we just don't think that that's the best way to go starting out.
And I think you raised a point, which is each of these projects is going to come before the board for final approval. So you all will get to weigh in as to whether you believe that's appropriate for the city. It's not like they get it automatically. A proposal will be made to the city commission, and it'll be your final call.
But I want to add a footnote to that. I don't want the commissioners to have any concern in your back of your mind that we would just bring forward these projects and then leave it to the board to have to then be the bad cop, to say no. If at a staff level, based on our analysis, you know, we know our city also. We know our neighborhoods. And so if we think that it's a bad project, as an example, or if we think there is an oversaturation of a certain type of development within a neighborhood, you know, we're not going to just move a project forward and recommend it to the board. Now, we may move it forward if they have a right to their hearing before the board with a recommendation for it to not be approved. So we, you know, kind of working through this. I would tell you, as the city administrator, and I know this probably will come as a shock to you all, I have no hesitation about recommending denial or recommending against something if I don't feel it's in the best interest of the city. So you all don't have to be worried about that the city administrator under her economic development hat, you know, is going to be hesitant to stand before the board and say, I don't recommend this because it's a bad deal. You don't have that worry at all.
President Ward.
I think we're all shocked about that.
I know you would be.
And I appreciate the commentary about flexibility and then tweaking, because I think that that's where that flexibility concerns me. You know, that saying is like the path to hell is paved with good intentions. I understand the intentions of this, and I know we've had previous conversations in the public otherwise. When there's discretion involved, that's where my concern is, because I feel like you all may look at it and staff may look at it. One, I really think these resources, we need to look at staff and make sure that we're able to handle this because our staff is already spread thin. But then two, when it comes to public opinion, okay, we've felt that, you know, this isn't a good idea. Staff is saying, hey, we've looked at this and, you know, our mindset is no. Well, then there's the public opinion. Then there's the part where everybody weighs in and they're very popular and people love them and we should push forward. Then they start contacting us. I worry about that initial discretion and flexibility. And if we can tweak it, I realize that it's moving and that there's not a lot to base on, is what the attorney said. That is my biggest concern. And I'm just hearing this now. Maybe we need, if I would appreciate another meeting before it comes to us of more detail of how this could be implemented. Because it is a lot on staff to have to utilize that discretion and tell people no. And because then they just try to subvert and then they go over heads. And I worry about that.
I mean, point well taken. I don't think that there is any initiative or program we can put in place, quite frankly, with all of the conceivable criteria in there, that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the nature of the beast that we deal with in the work that we do. To the extent that we can, we try to design a program that will be based on a certain criteria and then based on merit. But what happens around it is going to happen. I would ask, and certainly we can bring it back, in for another work session. But if the program were to move forward after we workshop it another time, and I know this is the first time that it's been presented, and I certainly respect the fact that it may take us, another round here in terms of presenting it after we fine-tune the guidelines and the applications that will have more of the details. So right now, we're looking at the concept itself, and we got to put a lot of more meat on the bone. But if, after doing all of that, we were to move forward, if we want, after a year or after we get 2 or 3 takers, if we get any, the board wants to then revisit it in terms of the program guidelines, I mean, we can always do that at any given point that you want to see a program come back to the board for tweaking. I mean, we have to gain experience to know where we need to make the tweaks to recommend the board. And then the board may have suggested tweaks just from your vantage point. So I think, it's going to require, at whatever point we get the program up and running, to give us that experience where we'll be in a better position to say, okay, it does make sense to then add this criteria as part of the guidelines. And it may be some that we just not thought about. It may take us doing a deeper dive with Fort Lauderdale to kind of get a deeper understanding of their program, maybe lessons learned that we would then even add some more elements to our program. But right now, I think we have an opportunity to add a new tool in the toolbox in non-CRA areas of our city that are ripe for just having some type of incentive to help redevelop those areas. And I don't want us to miss that opportunity. But certainly we have to be diligent with how we proceed with creating this opportunity. Understood.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. I don't know if you have this information ready now, or if maybe it could be at a later workshop, as you mentioned. I'd be interested in learning more and being reminded about those economic development priority industry areas that you mentioned would be part of the criteria. So I know education, medical, marine, technology, and just being refreshed on how those were selected, why those are important to the city. Some data surrounding that would be helpful.
Will do.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this? All right, so we will, staff will get back to work fine-tuning this. We will discuss the feasibility of another workshop, or whether we go right to a commission meeting. But we will certainly look into those possibilities. All right, I don't have anything under mayor's matters. Do you all have anything for the good of, yeah, Commissioner, President Ward.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if anybody in the room could give us a status of the road audit.
Before we move on, Mayor, I just want to thank Ms. Kitzmiller for, coming. She was the author of the paper with Fort Lauderdale, and certainly, we're benefiting from her experience of being, on the forefront of helping them draft their program, and I hope you will continue to be available so we can kind of draw on your experience as we, consider what direction we're going to move with this one.
I'm happy to, and I'll be in the back of the room at the end of the meeting if you have any questions.
And I heard what you said about coming in as a drowned rat, so I made sure we had sunshine when you left.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so what was your question?
The status of the road audit.
Road audit.
What's?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Good morning again, Leon Pender, Public Works Director. So the company has already started the audit, so it's going to take, they did the initial assessment of it, and it's going to probably be towards the end of the year before they get everything put together and then come back with some recommendations with their fundings.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, that's all we have. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much.